Have you ever noticed how some people can dish out compliments all day, but the second you try to return one, they practically shrink into themselves? Or maybe you're that person. Someone says you did a great job on a project, and suddenly you're listing everyone else who helped, downplaying your role, or laughing it off like they must be joking. You might think this is just humility or not wanting to seem arrogant. But what if I told you there's actually a fascinating psychology behind why accepting a compliment can feel harder than running a marathon for some people? It's not about being modest. It's about something much deeper happening beneath the surface. Understanding why compliments feel like emotional landmines can actually reveal a lot about how you see yourself, what you learned growing up, and the stories you've been telling yourself for years. So let's talk about what's really going on when someone can't just say thank you. Number 1. The worthiness gap. Do you ever feel like compliments are meant for someone else? Like the person giving them must have you confused with a better version of yourself. This is what psychologists call low self-worth, and it creates this massive gap between how others see you and how you see yourself. When someone compliments your work, your appearance, or your character, their words have to cross this canyon of disbelief to reach you. And most of the time, they just fall right in. You genuinely cannot compute the positive feedback because it contradicts the internal narrative you've built. Maybe you see yourself as average, or not talented enough, or always falling short. So when someone says otherwise, your brain treats it like an error message. It's not that you think the other person is lying exactly. It's more like their perception feels impossible to reconcile with your own reality. You might respond with something like, "Oh, this old thing?" Or, "I just got lucky." Because accepting the compliment would mean updating your entire self-concept, and that feels too destabilizing. The deflection isn't politeness, it's self-protection. If you don't accept the compliment, you don't have to challenge the story you've been telling yourself, even if that story is hurting you. Number 2. The vulnerability of being seen. Have you spent so much energy trying to be invisible that being noticed feels like a spotlight burning your skin? For some people, compliments trigger intense discomfort, not because they disagree with the content, but because they hate the attention itself. Being complimented means being perceived, and being perceived means being vulnerable to judgment, criticism, or expectations you're terrified you can't meet. There's this protective instinct that kicks in, where staying small and unnoticed feels safer than being acknowledged for something positive. Psychologists studying social anxiety have found that people who struggle with compliments often have what's called a negative attentional bias, meaning their brains are hardwired to scan for threats and criticism rather than positive feedback. So when someone compliments you, your nervous system might actually interpret it as danger because now you're visible, now you're on the radar, and now there's pressure to maintain whatever quality they noticed. You might physically cringe, change the subject immediately, or deflect with humor, because the sensation of being seen feels unbearable. It's like you've spent years building this fortress of invisibility, and a compliment is someone knocking on the door asking you to come out. The armor you've built to protect yourself from criticism also blocks out praise, and removing it, even for a second, feels like too much risk. Number 3. The transaction trap. Does it seem like every time someone compliments you, your mind immediately starts calculating what you owe them in return? Some people can't accept compliments because they've unconsciously turned every positive interaction into a transaction that leaves them in debt. You hear, "You're really good at this," and your brain translates it to, "Now I have to compliment them back," or "Now they expect something from me," or "This comes with strings attached." This often develops in environments where love, approval, and praise were conditional, where nothing was freely given without an expectation of reciprocation or performance. Research in attachment theory shows that people with anxious attachment styles often struggle with receiving without immediate reciprocity, because they learned early that care comes with conditions. So compliments feel like obligations rather than gifts. You might immediately compliment the other person back, not from genuine appreciation, but from this panicky need to balance the scales and neutralize the debt you feel you've suddenly incurred. Or you might reject the compliment entirely, because accepting it would mean owing something you're not sure you can deliver. The idea that someone might genuinely appreciate you without wanting anything in return feels foreign, even suspicious. You've been taught that everything has a price, so free praise must be a trap. Number 4. The imposter phenomenon. Are you someone who's convinced that any success you've had is just elaborate luck, and everyone's about to figure out you're a fraud. This is the classic imposter syndrome showing up, and it makes compliments feel like evidence that's about to be used against you when the truth comes out. When someone praises your intelligence, your creativity, or your accomplishments, you don't hear validation. You hear the ticking clock counting down to the moment they discover you've been faking it all along. Psychologists define imposter syndrome as a psychological pattern where people doubt their skills and accomplishments, despite external evidence of competence. And it's shockingly common among high achievers. You might have an impressive resume, consistent positive feedback, and objective proof of your abilities, but none of it penetrates the belief that you're somehow fooling everyone. So compliments become uncomfortable reminders of the gap between how people perceive you and who you secretly believe you are. You deflect with things like, anyone could have done it, or I just worked really hard. Because attributing success to your actual abilities feels like a lie you're not willing to tell. The compliment isn't rejected because you're humble. It's rejected because accepting it would mean admitting you belong in spaces where you feel like an intruder. You've built an entire identity around not deserving your achievements, and a sincere compliment threatens to dismantle that identity, brick by brick. Number 5. The criticism echo chamber. Have you ever noticed that one criticism can erase 100 compliments in your mind? Like, negative feedback has this permanent ink quality, while praise just evaporates. Some people struggle with compliments because their internal landscape is dominated by critical voices from their past. Voices that have become so loud and so constant that positive feedback can't compete. Maybe you grew up with a parent who rarely praised you but frequently pointed out flaws. Or maybe you internalized the voice of a teacher, coach, or peer who made you feel inadequate. Neuroscience research shows that our brains have a negativity bias, meaning we're wired to pay more attention to negative information as a survival mechanism. But for some people, this bias becomes extreme. Your brain has basically become an echo chamber for criticism, replaying every harsh word, every disappointment, every time you didn't measure up. So when someone offers a genuine compliment, it's like trying to whisper something kind in a room where harsh voices are screaming. You literally cannot hear it over the noise. You might intellectually recognize that someone said something nice, but emotionally, it doesn't register, because the critical voice immediately provides a rebuttal. They say you're talented, and the voice says, remember when you failed? They say you're kind, and the voice says you're actually selfish. The compliment gets drowned out before it ever has a chance to land, and you deflect it. Not because you're choosing to, but because your internal system is set up to reject anything that contradicts the negative narrative you've been fed for years. Number 6. The perfectionism prison. Do you find yourself thinking that if people really knew the full picture, they wouldn't be complimenting you at all? Perfectionists often struggle with compliments because they're constantly measuring themselves against an impossible standard that they're never meeting. Someone might compliment a project you completed, and all you can think about is the 3 mistakes you made, the ways it could have been better, or how it doesn't match the flawless version you had in your head. Psychologists studying perfectionism have identified something called discrepancy, which is the gap between your actual self and your ideal self. And for perfectionists, this gap feels enormous. Compliments land in that gap and just disappear because they're commenting on what you actually did while you're fixated on what you should have done. You might respond to praise with immediate qualifications like, yeah, but I should have, or it's not really that good because accepting the compliment would mean accepting an imperfect version of yourself, and that feels impossible. The compliment isn't about your real achievement in your mind. It's about a subpar performance that happened to fool someone who doesn't have your standards. There's also this exhausting element where accepting a compliment feels like permission to stop striving, and you're terrified that if you acknowledge you did well, you'll lose the drive that keeps you pushing forward. So you reject praise to maintain the tension that fuels your perfectionism, even though that tension is slowly crushing you. The compliment becomes a threat to the system that's holding you together, dysfunctional as that system might be. Number 7. Learning to let it land. So what do you do with all of this if you recognize yourself in these patterns? First, understand that the inability to accept compliments isn't a character flaw or proof that you're broken. It's a learned response to experiences that taught you to be suspicious of positive feedback. And what's learned can be gently unlearned. Start small. The next time someone compliments you, try just saying thank you without adding any qualifications, deflections, or immediate compliments in return. It will feel awkward and possibly even dishonest at first, and that's okay. You're retraining your nervous system to tolerate being seen positively. Notice what happens in your body when you receive a compliment. Does your chest tighten? Do you want to run? Does your mind immediately start arguing? Just notice without judgment. This is what psychologists call affect labeling. And research shows that simply naming what you're feeling can reduce its intensity. You might also try writing down compliments you receive and reading them later when you're not in that activated state. Sometimes distance makes them easier to absorb. And if you realize that your relationship with compliments is tied to deeper issues around self-worth, past trauma, or mental health struggles, reaching out to a therapist who specializes in these areas can be genuinely transformative. You deserve to receive kindness, including kind words about who you are and what you do. The voice that says otherwise is just louder right now, but it doesn't have to be permanent. What resonated with you in this? Drop a comment about your experience with compliments, and if this helped you understand yourself or someone you care about a little better, share it with them. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in this makes all the difference.